Okay, wonderful. So welcome everybody to this event, Creating Safe Spaces to Heal. This is part of our Problem Gambling Awareness Month activities here in Illinois, but we've got all over who have just incredible things to share. I wanted to let you know that we are recording, but only our speakers will be showing up on the recording. And then prior to opening it up for conversation with all of our attendees, we'll stop recording so that everybody can be real comfortable about that. For those who are counseling staff in Illinois and you would like a certificate for continuing education hours, I'm going to be putting through the chat so that you can complete a satisfaction survey afterwards and I will also be sending out an email afterwards to everybody that has that link. And if you forget, even if you don't need it, go ahead and do that. That's fine. So very excited to have everybody. I'm going to introduce myself and our assistant being a big help to all of us. So I'm Elizabeth Thiel and I'm with Nicasa Behavioral Health Services. I oversee our gambling program. We've been in Lake County, Illinois since 1966, providing a variety of behavioral health services. I'm also a person with lived experience with gambling harm. Care very much about this topic and just so excited to see that so many people care about this topic too. And I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany to introduce herself and her organization. Oh, I'm sorry. Kente Gardnell is our gambling outreach specialist. And thank you so much, Kente.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tiffany.
I'm Kente Warnell with the team specialist, gambling specialist. Happy to be here today.
Thank you, Kente. And Tiffany.
Yes, I'm Tiffany Webb, and I am the Gambling Prevention Outreach Coordinator for Healthcare Alternative Systems. We provide outreach services in the framework of problem gambling, and we have 6 service offerings: problem gambling screenings, we educate the clients, and then we also do self-exclusion support, linkage to care, community outreach services, and then staff training.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Anita.
Thank you. I'm Anita Pinger with the Way Back In. We provide extended residential care, recovery homes, and outpatient services for substance use and gambling use disorders. And Elizabeth and I have been working for a long time together, as well as the Way Back In has been providing gambling use disorder services since about 2000.
Thank you, Anita. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah McHugh with Family Guidance Centers. We are a behavioral health care organization providing services in the Chicagoland area, but also around the state of Illinois with prevention, outreach, and treatment services. And in the last, 5 years or so, gambling related services and outreach. So we're much newer to it than Anita and Elizabeth, who I'm learning a lot from, but so excited to be involved in this and seeing, how it impacts people and how much help can be provided when people are made aware of how to help and that sort of thing. So just happy to be here, and a shout out, thank you to all my FGC people who I see logged on. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Sarah. And now we get to the good part. We're going to introduce our panelists. So Tiffany is going to introduce Dr. Adele.
Yes. So you can make it, but it's easier if you don't do it alone. By Betty Ford is a quote that comes to mind when I think about Dr. Adele. Dr. Adele, Sandra Adele, is a literature professor in the Department of Afro American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In addition to several books and articles and reviews on African American literature and theater, she is the author of the 2010 memoir titled Confessions of a Slot Machine Queen. Her current project, which is under review by the University of Illinois Press, is titled And Then the Casinos Came: Black Women's Narrative of Gambling, Addiction, Recovery. In this book, Sandra weaves the narratives of 5 African American women who self identify as problem or compulsive gamblers with her own story and her research on gambling, addiction, and recovery.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tiffany. And then Anita will introduce Cassandra.
We are so lucky to have Cassandra Belton with us, who is an educational professional and advocate who has been on a journey of recovery from compulsive gambling since her mid-20s. Committed to supporting others, she found a weekly online fellowship group for Black women facing similar challenges. Cassandra has shared her experiences on national platforms, including the National Council on Problem Gambling, where she represents Black women speaking out about problem gambling. As part of her continued growth, she's a certified peer recovery coach, yay, and remains dedicated to serving the problem gambling community. She is currently rebranding her fellowship group for Black women with more details to come, so stay tuned. Beyond her professional and advocacy work, Cassandra finds joy in spending time with her two sons, Jalen and Omari, and cherishes moments with her mother, a breast cancer survivor. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful. And then I get the honor of introducing our other panelist, Brian Meister, who is a retired CADC, so a certified alcohol and drug counselor in Illinois, as well as an ICPG-1, which is an internationally certified gambling credential with a master's in marriage and family therapy, along with lived experience involving gambling, drugs, and dysfunction. Brian and I met when he applied for a gambling outreach coordinator position, or a gambling counselor position with Nicasa. And that interview went past closing time, and everybody else who was involved were like, can we leave? And Brian and I just really realized that we both had this connection over caring so much about this issue. And I will just say, over the years, even though Brian isn't with Nicasa anymore, continues just to be an ongoing resource, a source of support and knowledge and information. And one thing that I will always remember from working with Brian is there was a time he made a series of workshops, and it was every Wednesday night from like 7 to 9 p.m. for like 6 weeks. And he had great topics and all of this very good information. And I think on one of those days, one person came. And Brian and I share a sentiment, which is one person, it makes it worth it. And this is what's so cool. About a year later, a woman came into services for gambling counseling, and she said, I had the flyer in my hand and I was outside the door, but I wasn't ready to come in. So I didn't come to that series, but I held on to this. And she ended up getting care after the fact. So we were like, worth it. And I maintained that Brian helped give to me at that time. So glad to have you here, Brian, along with all the rest of our guests. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hear from our panelists, and we're going to hear just an introduction to what they've been doing to create safe spaces to heal. And I'd love to start with Dr. Sandra Dell.
Thank you very much. And I want to start by saying that I am coming to you from the Department of African American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I am incredibly grateful to my colleagues in this department who have been so supportive of me and my work. I want to say that at this point, what I'm doing to help to create and develop spaces for folks to heal is to write about it. And with the hope and expectation, that's a big expectation, that what I'm doing is going to go out into the community of other professionals and non-professionals, and particularly folks who are in Black studies, because this is an area of concern that has not yet reached the scholars and researchers who have the skills to do a different kind of study than I did with this work. So right now, just looking at the group of people we have here, the connection that I've made, that we were made, Elizabeth, and then Brian's facilitating my connection with Cassandra, and then meeting all these other folks, and then finally getting in touch with Tiffany is part of I feel a great sense of accomplishment in that regard, because for many, many years, I was wondering and asking out loud whenever I gave a presentation is, where are the other voices of the Black women? Where are they? And so now we're all coming together in a kind of building a network so that other folks will know that there is help out there for them, and they're not going to land, on concrete. There's a net and a network. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Adele, that's quite a analogy and a visual there. So thank you for sharing that. So Cassandra, what would you like to tell us about what you've been doing to create safe spaces to heal?
First of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces and new faces, and also just knowing that the space, as to piggyback on what Dr. Adele said, the need for these spaces is so imperative. Um, as you know, I did create the weekly Lotus Sisters fellowship, and in that fellowship, it was brave, but in a space, it became our sisterhood, and there's still a need for this space. I'm continuing to revamp the space as we speak. Harmony for Hope is what it's called. And I'm hoping that your questions today will further facilitate safe spaces like this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. And Brian, what have you been doing to create safe spaces to heal?
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, Anita, Sarah, Tiffany. Good to see you, Sandra and Cassandra. And I think I recognize some names or faces. So yay, Elizabeth, more than one person showed up. So, um, uh, so what I've been doing, mainly in my recovery, I left my professional life. I still speak. And I speak as a hybrid, someone with lived experience and a retired professional in the field. So I still go to some treatment centers. I'll reach out to people who have blogs, not blogs, podcasts. Um, so what I do, because even though I'm sitting here as a white cisgender male, a lot of recovery systems, some recovery systems don't work for me as an atheist. So I think Cassandra, and I'm met at one of the groups that I opened, and then meeting Cassandra and hearing her story was the connection with Dr. Bell. And so I have a couple meetings going um, that I've started, I've been part of starting. I keep throwing different meetings out there from a secular perspective. In the gambling world, if you have a client who is an atheist, you're kind of stuck. And I'll talk more about this later. So I try and create spaces where people can, and I usually call them free thinker meetings. And I had some recovery circles going that were listed on Gamblers in Recovery, one on shame, one on the 16-step model. I'll talk about that later. And gosh, I forgot what the other one was. But right now, I have stepped back from that, but not step back, stop doing stuff, just trying to create stuff. So I have a website out there someplace, and I'm just talking about how we treat each other, both as clinicians. I still have friends who are clinicians, and many people don't know about gambling. Even experienced clinicians haven't worked with a gambler. So I just keep trying to find stuff that'll work for people, and fortunately, there are a couple that have. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And so we have some kind of guided discussion questions that we have for our panelists, and we're kind of going to hop around so that everybody can get an opportunity to expand on what they've shared so far. And so we'll start with Tiffany with a question for Dr. Adele.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. So when I first had the pleasure of learning about Dr. Adele, it was through one of the ICPG trainings titled Black women speak out about gambling addiction and recovery. And then I immediately thought that this is what the many faces of recovery look like. So, Dr. Adele, the question I would have to ask you, and I've been dying to ask you, is you're a literature professor, yet you work crossing into social sciences. How did you manage to make the shift in terms of your research and writing?
Uh, yeah, fortunately, I have people here that I was able to discuss the writing part of the project. When I wrote my first book, Confessions of a Slot Machine Queen, I was writing from journal entries and I was in distress. And and so writing a book when you're in distress probably isn't the best thing, but I had to get that story out there. With this project, I have I did a lot of reading about anything I could find on gambling addiction and the therapeutics, as much as I could understand, because I went and did a deep dive into some neuroscientific work and so forth. And then the next part was for the purposes of this book, and then the casinos came, it had to be put into ordinary language. So even though it is an academic book, I had to work and just revise and revise and put it into ordinary language. What I'd like to do quickly is just give you a bit of what I concluded that explains why this book is important. And I write that, and I'm reading this, that for over a decade, have used my position as a university professor and that lived experience to help bring public awareness to the growing epidemic of gambling addiction among Black women. Um, Now, as I've argued, and I'm arguing throughout this next book, although we cannot stop the gambling industry from further encroaching on our lives, we must speak out about what it's doing to our communities. So, and then the casinos came, then built on scholarship by researchers and therapists by introducing the voices of African American women who are likewise struggling to understand and overcome the silent addiction. Now, what I've tried to do is frame information gathered through personal interviews and conversations with African American women, and they're from across the country, um, around the studies by neuroscientists, scholars, whose work provide important insights into the effect of the gambling on the brain's reward system. So I have to put all of this in ordinary language. I have tried to expand on therapeutic examinations of gambling problems among women by situating these African American women's narratives within their lived experiences as racialized subjects. I have argued throughout this book that for Black women, race matters as much as gender. And an understanding of Black women's racial and gendered identities is crucial for structuring adequate treatment and prevention modalities. Now, my goal, as I stated early on, is to start the discussion so scholars and researchers will have a better understanding of why so many Black women are seeking refuge in a place that promises way more than it's designed to deliver. And Brian, some of the issues that you raise, I deal with in the book as well. And that is the model of the 12-step program, why it doesn't work for all folks. It's been for years the golden standard, and it has to change. The modalities have to change. And part of this, what's happening with this work, Tiffany, through our conversations, yours and mine, I'm getting a deeper understanding of what needs to happen and how this needs to happen. For example, most of us who are in Cassandra's group, we believe, or at least I believe, I shouldn't speak for Cassandra, but I believe that for gambling addiction, total abstinence is required. I don't know how you can get out of this because of, the advertising and so forth, but that might not work for everybody. So how do you mitigate the harm? And those are some of the issues that I have not yet been able to figure out. How do you mitigate the harm when everything is designed to draw you back in to lose your money? So there's some of these shortcomings. I'm also very, very unapologetically opposed to all forms of gambling now because I know the damage that is happening. But I have to temper, and this is another part that we've talked about, Cassandra, I have to temper that rhetoric. I've had to learn to tone it down a bit as I'm presenting it and remember what my goal is, and that is to present this work out to the public. Thank you.
Dr. Adele, we could spend the rest
Thank
of
you.
the time just expanding on everything that you just shared. It was incredible. Cassandra or Anita, you have a question for Cassandra?
Actually, it was going to be Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Anita and Elizabeth. Cassandra, you've been so successful and invested in creating safe spaces for women affected by this gambling problem to heal. What challenges, though, have you faced as you create different ways for people impacted by problem gambling to gain support and healing? I'm sure we could kind of learn from what some of the challenges are in creating that safe space.
In early 2000, it was a weekly group. So,
Uh-huh.
as you know, my recovery started during the pandemic. My day of sobriety, I always say, is April 2nd, 2020. So I started and have always been on Zoom. So being with that I've been on Zoom, the space that I kind of felt angered and so toiled that I needed to create my own space for a whole year. So that's every Sunday for a whole year by myself.
Uh-huh.
And then the following year, it became bi-weekly. And with that challenge, I'm a special education teacher. I'm not a clinician. And then our group started to have uncomfortability where I wouldn't say that the space became unsafe. It needed to have more than what I offered or what we were offering to each other. We became a sisterhood, and yes, we could share our likenesses with the challenges in problem gambling. We can share our woes, how we're doing in recovery. We could also talk about the other safe spaces that were supposed to be safe and then come and kind of complain about the spaces as we're going through Zoom and then we're going to in-person meetings. He's like, you wouldn't believe what happened at this meeting. Would you believe that they wouldn't let me in? That happens often, where in a Zoom meeting, a sister may be waiting to enter into a space and they won't be let in. Also racial epithets that may be said at a meeting while we are in a space that is supposed to be safe. So the challenges that I had is one, continuing to hear the harm that was done in some of the spaces that are supposed to be safe. My own self-care, let's keep it real, doing this work, even though I became a peer recovery coach, I had to retighten or reinvest in my own recovery, get my spiritual work done to a T, going to worship service as I can, tighten it up with my own going to meetings, as they say. What do we say? Meetings make it. Aligning myself with self-regulation and really thinking, what is it that I can do to be a better service to myself so that I can serve others? As they say, you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot pour from an empty cup. I've been thankful, very, very thankful that I have met so many clinicians and professionals that have a desire to want to connect with someone like myself, a Black woman. But I feel sometimes the talk necessarily is it's there, but I don't see the movement to really do it. So I've been presenting, and this is about my 5th presentation. And I've also done my call to action as well, where I want to align with a nonprofit where the space could go from Zoom to be with providers that are clinicians. There are 7 women. We moved from 12 women to about 7. And I know this is a work in progress. This is a work in progress. And I'm glad that these platforms are here where we can get the word out.
Yeah. Thank you. You're searching for how to see as the needs of the group change and to find the more that's needed if there's something more that's needed and find the interface between, self-help and also, linkage with, professionals as needed and making all those connections, which is a whole lot. But thank you for that. And I think it's incredible that the connection is still going. So
Thank you, Cassandra. And you know what's really interesting? I was at a conference completely unrelated. It was to women in sport. And there was a guest speaker from like some sort of program, Google X or something, and it's some sort of offshoot of Google that gets tons of resources and doesn't have all the restraints that they have in their big thing. And it's really their purpose is like improve the world. That's it. No boundaries, just do it. And one of the things that they do when they have a project and they realize that it's not going to actually be able to be seen through, they have a party to celebrate versus, kind of like see it as a failure. And they do something called composting, which I thought was really cool. They look for the pieces of that project, things learned, I don't even know, aspects of it that they think are so valuable that rather than say this is garbage, it's compost, it gets created and it maybe enriches something else. I thought that was really cool. And I think when I hear what you have started and evolved, rather than say this didn't work, it's more like what needs to be drawn from and enrich this next phase. And I think that's really, really beautiful. So thank you for that. And I have a question for Brian. Are safe spaces conducive to healing and the examination of internal and external forces, factoring in the use of gambling? It's a good question.
It's a lot there, and I wrote that. So let me, in academia, someone can certainly tell me if I'm wrong. The discussion of brave spaces versus safe spaces, and I use brave spaces in my language. I wrote language for a Gamblers Anonymous room, and we wrote about creating a safe space. And I don't know how to create a safe space. I know how to work on it. I know how to work on it internally. I think what Cassandra talked about in terms of the self-care is important. But having Dr. Adele talk about here, let me take a step back. Right? It's for all the clinicians here. What's one of the first things we learn is cultural competence. How well and how much work can we do on that? And to me, it's about curiosity and acceptance and humility, right? That I don't know. And so any of the mutual aid groups, whether it's 12-step, smart recovery, recovery Dharma. I go to an atheist AA group, an official AA group. How do we create these safe spaces? Because I don't know I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out my history and how it all works. I don't know where somebody came from and what internally they're going through. So, we'll just talk about 12-step for a moment. 12-step was written in 1939. Gamblers Anonymous adapted the steps in 57. The language is very limiting. The understanding of trauma was non-existent. The first 100 in AA, I'm guessing, I know there was only one Catholic. I don't know if there are any Jews. I don't know if there are any people of color. I don't, it was written from and he wrote it honestly, except, there's a couple of chapters that don't make me feel safe. And I'm a privileged, white guy. I don't feel safe. So I think that internal and external process of one, me working on my safety wherever I am, knowing that there's risks in that, and not to pretend. Um, if you're in Gamblers Anonymous, page 17, where are you on the steps? Do you have a sponsor yet? Things that people truly believe are going to keep you safe. And what is safe? Is safe just being away from your last bet day after day, month after month, year after year? Yes, that's great. Um, More importantly, when I do that, it keeps those around me safer because when I'm gambling, I'm causing pain, suffering, and devastation for others. Um, that's how I introduce myself at meetings. I'm a person who's gambling caused pain, suffering, and devastation for others. Um, that's still my struggle, and I say I struggle well with it because I'm aware of it. And in the spaces that I join, in the spaces that I create, I want to be authentic and not pretend I can create something that's safe for somebody who may not be safe, feel safe around me. And I'll end with a quick story. I have a dear friend. We're part of this um, addiction and recovery group at a religious home. Even though I'm an atheist, I'm a religious atheist. And one day, she's 50 years sober. Um, One day, a couple of years ago, I was mentioning some of my struggles with the big book. And like Dr. Adele said, I could get pretty passionate about that. You weren't saying it about the big book, but about the gambling industry. And and this was such a great example of bravery. She let me finish, and then she said, "You know what? You just triggered the hell out of me. I've been having males explain to me, yell at me about the way things should be, and it was triggering. Her trauma was triggered. So I could think I'm creating a safe space, but I don't know if it's safe for you. But I have to be aware that I don't know that, and and I still thank her to this day for that. And every once in a while, I'll use an example. I'll say, "Do you remember when you told me this?" And she nods her head. Yes, I remember. So, thanks.
Brian, thank you. I mean, that goes back to that humility that you were talking about. Like, we need to be prepared to say, that wasn't my intention, and I'm so grateful that you let me know that that affected you in that way. And I loved this question for so many reasons, and I think sometimes people are faced with, when they are in the rooms, some support meetings will say you don't need to know the why, you just need to not gamble. And I didn't gamble for pretty much 10 years straight. And I didn't look at the why, and I didn't understand it. And my healing didn't start, my recovery didn't start until I did start understanding that about myself. And so as a counselor, my stance has always been, it's important to understand the why if it's important to you to understand the why. And so I do think that is one time where it might not feel safe when somebody is recognizing they want to explore that and they're kind of shut down in the rooms. And then the other thing I want to say, it goes back to what Dr. Adele said about the feelings that we have about the environmental influences, including advertising and, potentially predatory practices that need to be looked at. And, that's the reality of our environment. And I think sometimes people do, recognize that they want to get involved and they want to have their voices heard. So, that's always, tricky. How do we have those voices heard? And so I'll just move on so we don't, miss out on all the other perspectives. Tiffany, you're next with your question.
Yes, first I want to say that this is very, very insightful to be here and to be a part of this. Cassandra, Dr. Adele, and Brian, you guys bring so many different perspectives, but we're all chewing away at the same problem. How do we make a safe space? And so my framework for the question I have for Dr. Adele is asking for help is one of the most vulnerable moments that individuals can have. And how did you ask for help and recruit women to be interviewed for your book?
Let me say that I was so desperate. I was about to fall off a cliff. So, I needed help badly. And in my first book, I talk about the crash and burn, getting drunk, passing out, getting drunk, and driving and getting arrested. In fact, I address more of that in this second book. Because I'm away from the experience now. Because I think in the first book, near the end of the first book, I just talk about this is what happened because I had already written that draft. And I told my counsel, by that time I was in personal counseling, and I told her that the whole book, the memoir would be a big lie if I didn't put that part in. But I was suffering. So writing this experience about getting drunk, uh, I got locked up, y'all. I went to jail for the night. I mean, if you don't stop then it's all over. But in terms of working with the other women, two things. I have a distance now. I like to think of myself as having recovered. I think of the recovery room and people, these are some other things that I deal with a little bit in this new book. What does it mean to say that you're in recovery? What do those terms mean? For me, I like to say that I have recovered. The door I went, the patient had to have surgery. She went into the recovery room, she got better, and she went out of the recovery room. She's done. She's healed in that regard. There's other stuff going on. But in terms of working with the other women, I don't think the timing is perfect. Because if I were in such crisis, I tried this to meet with a group of a couple of other people, some men here in Madison, and they were so busy talking about their last bet that it made me almost sick. And I told my counselor, my therapist, I can't do this. I can't even meet with other people because they're talking about their last game, their last hit, and it's making me sick. And so mine was a very lonely road in that sense, but I had personal counseling and I had a good counselor at Gateway Recovery here in Madison. She listened to me and I talk about that. And then at Harmonia Psychotherapy, I had somebody there that I worked with. So that part is in this new book, the part that I was not able to write. And then I also talk about you and Dr. Roberson, who, I've met. This is a whole different thing now because it just feels so good to be surrounded by people who actually care, and they understand that when we step out and have these, and present ourselves in this way, we're opening ourselves up. It's very vulnerable. And so, in terms to get to your question about writing about the other women's stories, what I needed to do, and this is where I got help from a couple of my colleagues, is decide that this is not data collection. I'm not sending out, I didn't send out a survey. I tried that. I started writing stuff and there were some questions, and it's like, this isn't going to work. I threw it away. That I needed to meet the women. I needed to be part of them. And they welcomed me. I'm the elder in the group. They welcomed me. And to learn to record, when I recorded, I had to learn to record these, ask a couple of questions, be quiet, listen. And then the next part was transcription. I'm transcribing this stuff. And of course, we have this, technical stuff, the transcription, but it's also reading and looking at this and deciding with the women, how much of this stuff, of your personal stuff are we going to put in here? There's some limits. For example, I had all the real names of everybody, and my colleagues said, no, you might not want to do that. This also has been institutional review board, approved. That was another thing I had to do. So I've gone through all of these processes, but working with these women and listening to them, there were a couple of things. When we were being recorded, when I was recording and interviewing them, that's one thing, that's one text. But there were other things that we talked about. I mean, we're on the phone together. I'm in the meetings with them, and I made it very clear that that's off limits unless they want to share with me and say, put this in your book. So those were some of the other things that I had to be very, very careful with, because the other thing is the voices. Now, these only one other women, only two other women are identified by their names. And I can say one is Tavania Thomas because she was on NBC News, and I double checked that. That's in the public domain. It's on YouTube, so I can use that. But I also, again, there was an interview that I had with her. And so I mixed some of that stuff. I cut out a lot of it and told her and sent it to her and said, look, let's not do this part. There's some things that the public doesn't need to know. I also felt that our children should be off limits. We don't name our children in it. Not my children's names are not in my first book. And so those are some things that I talked about with them. So that was the other part, just balancing it. But the most important thing for me is being part of these women, being part of this group. Because here's the other thing, they're outside of the university. The university is one kind of a culture, y'all. They're outside. I can be more authentically me with the ladies, with the Lotus sisters, and with you, and with Elizabeth and everybody else in this group. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you so much for that. I gathered, to kind of summarize, I gathered the relationship first, the permission. You asked for permission. You didn't just tell them what you were going to do. You asked for permission. And then you set boundaries, healthy boundaries that allow them to, again, to kind of tie back to why we're here, to create a safe space. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Adele.
Wow, it's so good. What you just said, Dr. Adele, about being genuine and being yourself, there is nothing like that when there is a place where you can be. And I know that I've been in meetings where I could just be myself and I'm not holding up this mask in any way. And you don't, until you set that down, you don't realize how heavy it is to carry it around all the time. And I think that is such a beautiful thing when there is that forum where people can just be genuine. Very cool. I love that. And I think Anita, you have a question.
I do. So, my question is to Cassandra. How does it affect you personally when things don't go as planned?
Oh, wow. I had to do my own check-in, my own personal check-in to, as I said before, to revamp my own recovery. Because in that space, I was challenged where one of our sisters was in active addiction. And that made me realize how my own addiction wasn't as tight as it needed to be. So we're talking that the sister called and was in significant crisis. So that made me go into crisis as I remember the noise of the casino in the background. And I didn't have a reach in to the toolkit to say, what do I say to my sister at this point? And then I had to now reach to the other sisters. So in that learning that I was in crisis, where I couldn't help someone else in crisis, oh my goodness. So it was reflective in that point. I took a break, a well-needed break from the Zoom space, but we still kept a phone space where we're still connected through our phone chat. And you know how phone chats can become. We're sending everything under the sun. We're sending our joys, our successes, whether we have a new job, that we don't have a job, we don't have a boyfriend, we don't have a girlfriend. This meeting, hey, I really love this meeting. So we're still connected. which is, oh, it has been such a joy that at one point I was like, listen, forget y'all. I'm hitting the road. I can't take this anymore. And they had to reel me back in. No, we need this space. We love this space. And I had to really think about it. I really did. I had to think long and hard. It took a lot out of me, but I realized how much I loved it.
So that's really beautiful. So I'm hearing you're saying, when it is something, right? How do I like take it personally or not take it personally when something doesn't go planned? Reflect, see how it's affecting me, which
Big
is
reflection.
often very important, right?
Mhm.
Because as much as we want to be there for other people and as much as we want to help everybody else, we can't help. I just heard, right? We can't pour from an empty cup. We can't help anyone without helping ourselves. So how does that affect me? And then setting those really important boundaries of maybe I'm gonna step away, but I'm still gonna do this. And if I choose to go back, it has to be my choice. So that's,
Absolutely.
yeah, really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. And I have a client who, in recognizing there weren't enough kind of options for what she was looking for in the community, she created them, and she got connected with the Phoenix Sobriety Network and created some sober events. And with that, it's stressful and it's organizing and there's worries. Isn't anybody going to show up? What if somebody shows up and, the way they're acting is disturbing or distressing to other people? And so she was able to say, I've got these things going on. I'm not going to run any more of these right now. I'll hold on to that. And so we really do need to recognize that we're part of the support that we create, right? And so we need to make sure that it's working for us too. Yeah, this is wonderful. Brian, I wanted to ask you about in what ways do you think some safe spaces might be limiting and rigid, you know, whether it's through 12-step program or even in clinical work, in allowing people to grow outside of their patterns?
Thanks. Well, once again, Dr. Adele touched on something, abstinence versus harm reduction. Um, how do I work with somebody, whether I did it as a clinician or let me just tell you, I did it for 25 years. I stopped the first time I got in recovery in 1981. I left in 86 after being really involved because I worked on the options exchange. It was my work. Um, and there were a lot of people with a lot of experience who said, yeah, it's your work. It's okay. And I said, no, it's not okay. But based on greed and fear, I did it. Um, High school education, where am I going to support my family? How am I, all these. Um, and I did a harm reduction. I went to work for 25 years, knowing it might be my last day, um, anything could happen. And things did happen. And also I learned from it. So, so if somebody wants to talk to me, whether it's somebody in the program, somebody who decides to leave the program, I want to go back, um, prison insanity or death, right? That's comes from AA, and every 12 step, not every 12-step group uses it. But the substances and gambling, I don't believe it's prison insanity or death. So sometimes things are so rigid, and we might be rigid as clinicians. Hey, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. And if you've never seen Bob Newhart, Stop It, watch it. Bob Newhart, Stop It. And right, how many times have we heard Stop It? From our loved ones, from our employers, and sometimes employees. Um, So when things get too rigid, you have to do this. And I mentioned it before, have you, um, do you accept step one? I no longer accept step one. I'm not powerless. I accept step one of Charlotte Castle's KASL 16-step model of discovery and empowerment. And step one tells us we have the power to stop substances, processes, um, and find our own path to self-esteem. And so I think when we get so fearful of, I got to do it this way because it's worked for millions, well, critical thinking says um, it hasn't worked for millions. So I don't, I'm not judging anyone that it's worked for. I'm in a relationship. It's only 23 years sober. You know, um, it worked for her, um, and it works for her and her friends. And I have dear friends in 12 step and Gamblers Anonymous. I've gone in and out of Gamblers Anonymous. So I think when we get rigid in our thinking and we're not curious and we're not, I mentioned trauma before. Um, um, I was never a trauma therapist. I wasn't trained as a trauma therapist. I did do one. Well, yeah, I wasn't trained as a trauma therapist, and it doesn't. It, but it did. I didn't run from trauma with when somebody brought it into the room, but also I would refer them out. Um, if that, if that was the, um, I'll put the 16-step model in there. Um, um, in the chat. So, yeah, I forgot the rest. But I think once we get rigid within, and let me say rigid within myself, so much. I just got one more stream of consciousness coming. So much of what drove my gambling was shame. Shame that some was conscious, much unconscious. And as I've done my work through the years, the unconscious has come to the conscious. But and now when we're shaming people in rooms, whatever it is, it's not just 12 step. I mean, I spent time going through Recovery Dharma. Thank you, Cassandra. Um, um, Cassandra put in the chat Charlie Castle's name at 16 steps. So it wasn't that I was getting shamed by the Buddhists, but and Recovery Dharma is a wonderful, wonderful place. I highly recommend it for people who want a softer approach. For people, they claim to be trauma informed. I'm not saying they are or aren't, but I'm sure they are trauma informed. How someone feels in there. Um, so whatever it is to allow people to find their own path to recovery. We all come into the rooms, into therapy, our own path. I don't believe there's any cookie cutter model. I don't care what the 9 questions are. Yeah, but within those 9 questions, right, or the 20 questions of Gamblers Anonymous, what does each one mean to you? Does it reputation could mean something different to you than it does to me. So, thanks.
Really great answers, Brian. And you talk about that rigidity that we might have within ourselves or just might be in certain rooms. And I think we do need to be able to challenge that because not everybody is the same. And if one person comes in and they get shut down for something, and we have a lot of things that can be sayings that are like mantras and they're very familiar. And sometimes people just, that doesn't fit for them. And, I think about, we had another potential panelist who actually is on a reality show somewhere, and that's why she couldn't come. But Christina Cook, who runs the Broke Girls Society podcast as well, and a support group for women. And when she started that podcast, she started it really early in her recovery process, and she actually was inviting people on to speak, and she brought and invited a therapist on. And they go, well, how long have you been gambling free? And I don't even remember. I think she said 2 months or something like that. And they said, I think it's a little early for you to be doing this. Why don't you wait a year? And then, when you have a year under your belt, and, that for the podcast is still going strong. Christina's still going strong. And is anybody to say this pathway that you're choosing for your recovery process that also may help many others is invalid because we've got this like 1 year benchmark. And I got a survey from one of the major, I don't even remember, one of the major Ivy League schools. And it was a survey about relationships. Nobody should go into a relationship until they're a year, and nobody should make any major changes. Don't move, don't get a different job for a year. And they were challenging, but their whole survey didn't say the word gambling. All it said was substance use. So every answer that I gave them, I said, I love that you're challenging this. Can you start adding in gambling to your surveys? Because you are perpetuating the invisibility of a lot of us. So thank you. And then our next question, I think, is from Sarah. No, I'm sorry, Tiffany.
It's Tiffany, right? But there's a question in the chat for Dr. Adele from Celine Castro. So I don't know if Tiffany wants to read that or some other question, but I just wanted to make a note that I saw a question for Dr. Adele in the chat.
Thanks. We'll definitely get to those. We're going to have a Q&A.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. So Dr. Adele, the next question I have for you is what concerns did you have about writing other women's stories?
That my voice would intrude into their stories. That was a big concern, which is why much of it is verbatim from their text, their recorded text, the transcription. And the other part, again, as we talked about it earlier, was checking in with them to ask if this is okay. Cassandra amuses me sometimes because I've read some things to her, some things that she said that are in the book, and she'll say, did I say that? It's like, yes, you did. And we were talking about, because we decided, and she might change her mind. And there's only so much mind changing they can go, folks, because the manuscript is out to the publisher. It's being reviewed. So the next step is that I'm not to touch it. My friends and my colleagues said, Sandy, don't look at it now. Don't change anything, because they've seen me revise and revise, and it's like, okay, you got to stop. And so it's going to be interesting to see what it goes out to anonymous reviewers. I don't have a contract, and that doesn't matter to me because I'm a senior professor. I'm about to retire, so I don't have to ever write another book if I don't want to. But anyway, this one's important to me. Two things, though. Tiffany, after having completed this, I felt an enormous burden lifted, because it was like something that's inside me. This has got to come out. It's just got to come out of me. And I have a ton of material that, I had been working on over the years about gambling and addiction and recovery and so forth. So with this book, then I had to be very careful about not intruding my voice, not letting my prejudices let my prejudices interfere with what they were saying. For example, I think all of the women that I met, I went through 12-step programs. I got some real concerns about the 12-step programs and about Gamblers Anonymous. So I have a whole section in the book where I give the history of the 12-step programs. And then Charlotte Castle's a book that has been referenced here. That is a huge book. It's a big, thick book. And I've gone through that. I've read that 2 or 3 times now. And so what I've done is just pulled out some of the things that she talks about because she creates some steps herself, like 16 steps. So we're still in the step program thing. And I'm trying to get out of the steps. And so, but that's my experience. So I had to separate that out. And when I talk about muting that voice, there's no point in me slamming 12, Gamblers Anonymous or the 12-step programs. My question or my concern and my appeal, and that's part of the call to action that Cassandra and a couple of others of us came together, and that's in my book, is that look at other modes of recovery. Personal therapy. I could not go into group counseling. I told my counselor, in 2006 that if you're going to send me to a 12-step program to Gamblers Anonymous, I'm doomed. I might, because I couldn't be in those spaces. And the question that somebody's asked about how my colleagues, viewed me when they knew about what was going on, they didn't know until my book came out. People did not know what I was going through. They know now because this is a different kind of book. So that's the big issue, is just that concern and being true to their stories, not letting my story and not letting my prejudices and biases interfere with their path of recovery and how they describe their path of recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Adair. I did have one last piece to this question. I'm sorry. For the framework of the book, how did you take care of yourself with diving deep into the ladies' stories? How did you take care of yourself?
Because I had people like you and Elizabeth and my sisters and Dr. Roberson, who Elizabeth and these people came on later, but throughout the process, it was just stepping back. Especially, here's some of the other stuff. There are some deeply personal things that were shared. That was when I would just have to step back away from the work, go do something else, go for a walk.
Mhm.
Yeah, do something fun. Because and also reminding myself always, I am not a therapist. I am not equipped to deal with the trauma that was in some of the issues that were building up, even within the group. And so that was what was so helpful. But for right now, at this moment, right now, as I'm looking at everybody here, I am so thankful and so grateful to all of you for helping see this work through, because the burden is off me. There are other women speaking out, other Black women speaking out. Those voices are being carried through. And it feels good, finally, that we're being heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. So I just want to say something, because Dr. Adele, you touched on something, the toll that it can have on people who are extending of themselves and sharing. That comes at a cost, and it's a cost that we kind of weigh, I'm willing to pay that cost. I know that in my part-time world, I speak to collegiate athletes about their risk for problem gambling. And in doing that, I share my story. Recently, I was visiting a campus where I was ready, I prepared myself, and the athletic department had not made it mandatory. And I had 3 sessions in a row where nobody came. And it took a toll on me, because you're like, I'm ready to share this and it's going to hurt me to share it, but it's for a purpose of hoping that you don't feel the pain that I felt. And then it almost felt like rejection, right? And so I had to reach out to my colleagues, and somebody said, that happened to me in Boston last week. We just need to let those schools that it needs to be mandatory, because they're hurting their student athletes by not having them hear this information. So I really agree. There's a toll. We're willing to pay it, but let's be mindful of it. I think we'll just have one more question for each panelist and then open it up to some discussion too. Anita, you have something for Cassandra?
No, back to Sarah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We made it a little confusing tag teaming. We're just trying to keep Elizabeth on her toes. That's all, Anita and I. But no, Cassandra, what drives you to keep evolving and persisting to find new ways to offer safe spaces to heal? Even though you said there was stress, and even though you said you had to almost walk away, and what drives you? What keeps you persisting?
The little chat that we have, the chat has been purposeful. Being invited to presentations like this, knowing that the work that I've done in 2020 was so purposeful. The constant reminders from Dr. Adele and the women, and from my own mental health. Being of service is part of recovery. So I look at this as a part of my service. Even though my anonymity sometimes is affected, it's on my LinkedIn page. And I can tell you that the people that work in where I work, the industry, they look at my LinkedIn page. So my anonymity, where I wouldn't say that it's harmed, because I had to give up my anonymity to be in spaces with all of you, right? So with that, what drives me? Like my God, it's my spiritual growth. I pray, like, am I doing the right thing, Lord? I think so because I get the tools. I don't want to say that I'm walking the walk, I'm talking the talk. It makes me feel good. I took a day off to do it. Shh, don't tell nobody. Um, but it's purposeful. It's purposeful for me to do it. I love doing it. I love sharing my story. Sometimes sharing my story does get emotional. And I'm learning how to do that, through Toastmasters. I used to be, any other advice there for those of you that do this type of work where you give a presentation and you have to dive deep and talk about things? I would love to connect with you in that manner as well. Um, it's going to be a part of my work for the rest of my life. It really is. And I'm building my team.
Yeah.
I already have my family, and I'm building the team. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. You're welcome. And thank you for your persistence that we talked about. And thank you for having that answer. You're actually the answer to your own question, actually, with what you just shared. So, you being here and doing what you're doing is the answer to that question. So, thank you for what you're doing. And I hope you keep getting as much out of it as you put into it. So,
Thank you, Sarah. Can I
thank
just piggyback? Did you guys hear the story that I went to an atheist meeting and that's how I met Brian? That
Oh,
okay? I want you to be clear. I went to a meeting from Gamma's Recovery, and that meeting was a meeting for atheists, and I knew where I was going. It was without a doubt. I did not say like, "Oh, I'm not going to go," but I needed a meeting at that time. And through that meeting, I believe that we read something about inclusion or inclusivity. And I shared about being a Black woman in GA. And Brian, thank God for this connection that after the meeting, where you have the after meeting talk, he connected me. I know someone, he says, that I know someone that will be good for you. And that is how Dr. Adele and I are connected. And it took me, what, 8 weeks or 2 months or something like that to write to her. It did. Yes, it did.
Wow. Okay. Anybody else like needed to fix your makeup now? That's awesome. Like that's so powerful. Wow. And who else wants on Cassandra's team? Like, sign me up. I want to be on that team. All right. I love it. I have one last question for Brian, then we're gonna open it up to everybody. Brian, can you speak a little bit about the Wellbriety movement and recovery circles?
I can't speak much about Wellbriety. Wellbriety is 12 steps adapted um, for indigenous populations. I met somebody recently in a circle I was running on the 16 steps from British Columbia, First Nations, and she told me about Wellbriety. So the I've written my own steps. I have a 6-step model. I don't push it too much, but um, and I don't even, I kind of agree with Dr. Adele, do we need steps? Do we need Sometimes structure is good. I'm not, um, it's Elizabeth and I would do presentations a lot. And I look at Elizabeth, I say, well, can we turn off the PowerPoint? Let's just talk. And she'd say no. And, and I can live with that structure. Structure is helpful, especially because most of us with lived experience create chaos. So how do I get out of chaos without some structure? Um, so with all the limitations, I believe the 12 steps have, the 12-step model, the 12 steps group, I also am ever grateful to Bill W. and Dr. Bob for um, the concept of two drunks talking to each other, right? That's all we do. I don't look at 12 step as self-help for me. It's mutual aid. It was people helping me, right? And then how do I um, um, turn that around and just share my life and my experience and but not I was one of my weaknesses learning curves as a clinician was, and in 12 step, like I'd sponsor somebody and they'd want me to tell them what to do. I said, I can't tell you what to do. Okay, let's look at your options. It's kind of Rogerian in method. Okay, let's create empathy um, um, and come up with options. And then the utility of the options is really our choice. And that's a whole nother theory of in recovery. I think it's, oh man, Mark Lewis's work on uh, desire as a choice or something. Um, um, Hannah Picard's work. But so um, for me, I forgot the question already. I can ramble. Let's go on to the next thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks for letting us know that that is out there because, we do want to make sure people have options and find the things.
Well, here. So if I can just go. So one of the big groups that came out, in not opposition to A, and you know what? In terms, they were kind of opposed to A, rational recovery. Rational recovery turned into smart recovery. I think they're both out there still. Smart recovery, a lot bigger. Recovery Dharma came out of another Buddhist group, but Recovery Dharma. Now, some of these groups, Smart Recovery, Recovery Dharma, are not gambling specific. I get my deepest recovery comes from a cancer support group I'm in. I have not had cancer. I've had surgeries, I've had biopsies, but the founder asked me to join. I get my deepest recovery because for me, recovery is about life. Now, life gets more difficult if I choose to gamble or do drugs. So, Recovery Dharma. Elizabeth mentioned the Broke Girl Society. You now all know about Cassandra's group. And I forgot who mentioned. I've started stuff, nowhere near the traditional places. I think something for the clinicians in here when people are struggling with stuff. Yeah, okay, what can you do about it? Right? How can you search and how can you maybe start something? Because Cassandra doesn't start something without experiencing other stuff. Even an atheist group. Were we safe that night? Was that safe for you that night? I'm kind of, yeah. That was our intent. We did want to have a space where people can talk about their atheist views, but this was all about people working through their own process. So, thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now, and this has been incredible, and I just want to stop recording.